So, Liberation Day or Tariff Day or whatever you want to call it, what can we say about the implications for New Zealand in the immediate wash-up? Well, the first is that New Zealand's exports to the US attracted a baseline tariff of 10%. Now that was at the very bottom of the range of tariffs announced today. So maybe some relief there for our exports to the US, which were worth about $9 billion last year, comprised mostly of beef, dairy and wine. A bigger concern for me was the much higher tariff rates announced for many of New Zealand's trading partners. Emerging Asia and China were hit with particularly large tariff increases. So for example, Chinese exports into the US will now face, we think, an average tariff rate of around 65%. Now this highlights what we've been flagging as probably the major risk for New Zealand out of these US tariff increases, is that weaker growth in some of our trading partners as their trade with the US gets hit could impact us through reduced trade, slower economic growth in New Zealand. Now, we don't necessarily know the magnitude of all of that. There's still too many moving parts, but we probably can say with some certainty that the impact will be negative. Now, of course, there are many other impacts and unknowns to work through. For example, who will end up taking the strain from these higher tariffs? Will it be exporters exporting less into the US? Will exporters export the same amount of stuff into the US but accept a lower price? Or will US consumers just have to pay a higher price to keep getting the stuff that they would like? Now in New Zealand's case, that's mostly beef for their burgers. Now we also know this is unlikely to be the last word on US trade policy. We'll also need to watch what other countries do and announce about possible reciprocal tariffs, about negotiations, deals, legal challenges. So in short, it's far from over. And that highlights one of the key implications, and one of perhaps the most certain implications, is that this heightened uncertainty we've got used to over the past couple of months is set to drag on. That is already becoming an issue for the US economy, and we may see some impacts down here as well. So for example, the Reserve Bank in its last statement flagged that uncertainty as an issue potentially for New Zealand business investment. And that's because when businesses are unsure about the general trade environment or policy environment, they tend to wait things out and do nothing. And doing nothing in of itself is something that can reduce economic growth. So any good news? Well, if you were looking for a silver lining, you'd say New Zealand exports into the US maybe just got a bit more competitive given the lower tariff rate on New Zealand exports compared to some other countries. In markets, share markets are not having a good time of it today, but we are seeing some falls in the New Zealand dollar, some falls in New Zealand wholesale interest rates, and that should provide a bit of a buffer for the New Zealand economy. But it is very much a moving feast. Things are still moving around, and we're going to have to continue to roll with the punches.